But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
State of the Nation tonight. Another day, another politically correct civil service wasting your money. Our wet wipes have reached a new level of dampness. We'll be examining a £140,000 contract issued to an anti-bullying agency by the Cabinet Office. Some of its employees have some interesting political views, and we'll be exposing them all. The government plans to take the Royal College of Nursing to court after the college has been using strikes as a political tool against the British people for the past 6 months. Could the chickens finally be coming home to roost for the unions? And the culture wars persist. But my final guest thinks they're a myth. Marina Perkins will be here, and I'm told she has said some pretty fruity things about me on Twitter. So that should be fun. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be blessed by an illustrious panel, former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards, and the journalist and author, Ella Whelan. But as ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of this programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for the all-important headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The first flight carrying British nationals out of Sudan has landed in Cyprus with around 40 people on board. More than 100 British troops are on the ground coordinating the evacuations. There's been fierce fighting between Sudan's army and rival paramilitary group for more than 2 weeks. The UK's rescue effort was given the go-ahead after they agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire. But reports of gunfire and explosions in major cities are making extractions perilous. It's understood there are around 2,000 British passport holders in Sudan. Rishi Sunak says there'll be 2 more flights overnight and many more tomorrow.
The first flight that left took everybody that was at the airfield and eligible is on that flight. There will be more flights this evening and then many more into tomorrow. We're contacting people both directly, but also we've issued out a general call for people if they can make their way to the airfield, they will then be processed. We can't guarantee the long-term sustainability of the airfield that we're currently using, so we're also exploring and standing up other alternative routes for safe exit.
Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out about the police investigation into SNP finances, saying she couldn't have imagined the events of the past few weeks in her worst nightmares. The former First Minister also said it wasn't true that she stepped down because she knew problems were about to unfold within her party. She was appearing at the Scottish Parliament for the first time since her husband's arrest. Peter Murrell, the party's former chief executive, was questioned by police earlier in the month and later released without charge. The party's treasurer, Colin Beattie, was also arrested last week and released pending further investigation. President Joe Biden has officially announced he's running for a second term in office, saying the next election will be a fight for democracy and personal freedom.
The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. That's why I'm running for re-election.
The US president also confirmed that Vice President Kamala Harris will run again alongside him. Well, Donald Trump has released a video criticizing Joe Biden for the so-called damage he's caused to the country and has called on his supporters for their vote.
With your support in the election, we will defeat Joe Biden in 2024. We will rescue our economy. We will crush inflation. We will stop the invasion on our southern border. We will restore our nation's dignity, and we will prevent World War III from happening.
A man who murdered a 2-year-old while her mother was asleep upstairs has been sentenced to life in prison. Kyle Bevan caused catastrophic brain injuries on Lola James in July 2020. She died in hospital 4 days later. The 31-year-old denied responsibility and claimed the family dog pushed her down the stairs. He was convicted in April. Lola's mother, Sinead James, has also been sentenced to 6 years in prison after being found guilty of allowing her daughter's death. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Jacob.
When His Majesty's government gives taxpayer-funded contracts, it has a responsibility, a duty, to be frugal and to do its due diligence. But today it's emerged, thanks to the Daily Express, that the Cabinet Office, the heart, the beating heart of government which connects through to number 10 Downing Street, has awarded a contract worth £140,000 to a company called Culture Shift. It's for bullying and harassment and discrimination reporting platform. All very worthy and splendid in so many ways. Important that people should be able to stop discrimination. And this organisation specialises in exquisitely politically correct equality and diversity training. But the company's CEO is a copper-bottomed lefty who sneers at Brexit and has a particular antipathy to earwigs. Indeed, so low does she believe earwigs to be that she thinks I'm a despicable gentrified earwig, which only makes me wonder how low it must be to be a bourgeois earwig. I cannot think of any worse fate in life than to be a bourgeois earwig. We gentrified earwigs certainly are in a position of superiority to the bourgeois earwig. But we've been in touch with Buglife because of this to see if they're going to be suing on behalf of earwigs for defamation, and we look forward to hearing back from them. The CEO, incidentally, celebrated Dominic Raab's downfall and seems to dislike all Tories. When I was Minister for Government Efficiency, I tried to stop this nonsense. I ordered 250 of these sort of silly courses, including Check Yo Privilege, to be stopped to save taxpayers' hard-earned money. But the Cabinet Office has responded in a whiny response that this is a pilot approach being tested in the Cabinet Office and supports the department's ongoing banned word. I would never use it. Why can't you say continuing? Never mind. Ongoing work aligned to the Civil Service Diversity and Exclusion Strategy. Why is there a diversity and inclusion strategy that excludes Conservatives? Are we not counted? Are we not sufficiently diverse? Do we have to be excluded? But they also told us that all contracts are reviewed and awarded following robust due diligence processes and in line with procurement regulations. This sounds so much as if it was written by Sir Humphrey. Perhaps he has come out of the grave. Procurement regulations and transparency guidelines. So why are they giving a contract to such a politically biased organisation? Perhaps transparency only covers socialist organisations and the hard left. It's time the government started pursuing a conservative agenda and stopped funding the hatred of Conservatives. But as always, I want to know what you think. So please get in touch. Email me at mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm particularly delighted now to be joined by Christian Calgie of the Daily Express, who broke this brilliant story. Indeed, texted me this morning for a view, and I cribbed your story for GB News. So thank you.
Welcome.
How did you come across this? Where did it come from?
Well, initially it came from the equally excellent Spectator website, who noted the interesting timing of a £140,000 anti-bullying contract being awarded so soon after the defenestration of Dominic Raab. And I think that's an equally interesting point, because I think it feeds into a wider sense that I've observed as someone in Westminster for a long time, that people like yourself, when you were in government and trying to get civil servants back into the office, for example, or repeated attempts by Conservative spokespeople and ministers to rein in the left-wing tendencies of the civil service, they seem to pull levers and nothing seems to respond, because obviously there's a separation between what ministers can do and what heads of departments can do in the role in regards to the civil service. And I would suggest that the timing is really bad. If the government is trying to reassure Conservative MPs who were incredibly upset or angry at Dominic Raab's resignation, to seem to be fueling the fire of anonymous civil service bullying complaints only a couple of days after he left office, it's not going to reassure people on your wing of the party, is it?
No, and it seems to me it undermines the genuine complaints of bullying. When I was Leader of the House, we set up the ICGS to try and ensure there was good behaviour in the House of Commons, because there were countless examples over many years of bad behaviour towards junior members of staff. Primarily, as it happens, from employees of the House of Commons rather than members of Parliament. And I know from my time in the Cabinet Office that there was a feeling that there was a culture there that wasn't an ideal one. And these are serious workplace problems. But what worries me is that the solution is always to go to some left-wing person who doesn't like the Conservatives, when actually bullying, as you see in the Labour Party, is not a party political problem.
Of course, but I think... you know, whilst the perpetrators may be from across the spectrum, as you rightly highlight, I mean, we've seen countless Labour MPs suspended over recent years for bullying. It's almost the culture of trying to rectify these sort of issues do feed into left-wing tendencies. I mean, I can't think of a freedom-loving free market HR training programme. And, you know, these things always tend to come in a bundle, don't they? You've got anti-bullying, and this company, Culture Shift, also specialise in trans inclusion, and they promote pronouns, and they've even, as we highlighted, taught one university how to make their campus a safer space for student sex workers. And, you know, I think that's the problem, is there's not much choice here. But what I would make clear is that often these sort of initiatives are legally mandated with equality legislation. And the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, and very often you see laws that could have been taken out, that could have been amended to promote free speech rather than restrict it, and we seem to have got nowhere in that. And these sort of contracts, this sort of civil service culture, is essentially born of legislation.
So the HR department says, look at the legislation, that means to protect ourselves, we've got to provide these courses, here are these courses, and here's the cost to the taxpayer. And you actually need fundamental reform to get back to a position where you have normal relationships within the workplace and normal good manners, which people don't necessarily need to go on a left-wing course to learn.
Well, I think really, yes, exactly. And a lot of it is more them trying to protect themselves from potential legal battles. And you know, that is why they go above and beyond on these things, to protect themselves. So I would suggest that they should remove that legislation if we want to stamp it out.
But some of the things they then go into seem to have no real academic base for it. So critical race theory becomes part of this, and you get into the idea of unknown privilege that isn't necessarily really there.
Well, I think that the problem with a lot of these sort of social movements and the left-wing ideology in general is that they tend to lock themselves away from the general public. Talk and talk and talk, overly masticate these ideas to the point where they're completely unpalatable to the general public, but they don't realise how far removed their views have become from the mainstream. And then they launch them into society. They come through Twitter, and they come through, left-wing aspects of the media, and they come top-down from the Labour Party. And that's exactly how. And you see the progression from women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, and then eventually you always end up in this extremist position where you're having to, allow trans access to women's bathrooms and all sorts of stuff like that.
But there's always a lot of money in it for the people who promote it. So it's £140,000 for running a hotline. That seems to me a very good deal if all you've got to do is have a hotline that may be monitored once a day, for £140,000.
Well, it is, and I'd also point to the Cabinet Office statement that we've both received. They were emphasising that this is just for the Cabinet Office and it's a pilot programme. And I would suggest that that almost makes things worse, because if this is £140 for one department, rather than being spread out across the entire government, then goodness knows how much more money is going to be ploughed into anti-bullying complaint hotlines, especially in light of the Dominic Raab controversy, when the government's priority, in my opinion, in the opinion of many Conservative MPs, should be reforming the process in favour of ministerial robustness and making civil servants work hard and well.
And it would be really interesting to find out whether this was signed off by a minister, because when I was there, I was trying to stop this. I very much doubt a subsequent minister has said, oh, no, please bring it all back. It's just the civil service machine going on, doing what it always wants to do, unless there's somebody saying no.
Exactly. It takes so much active and persistent resistance by ministers, who then have to liaise with permanent secretaries, and they've got to go through their Sir Humphreys in order to do this, and they will obfuscate and go, well, yes, Minister, but X and Y. And then eventually you've got to move on to the real bread and butter issue of policy, which affects ordinary people, whilst all the while the department's HR department is just ploughing along, and then you look up and you go, well, what on earth has happened here? And we're almost too far down the road to reverse it by that point.
Well, thank you very much, Christian, and thank you for breaking this excellent story. Of course, we're also lovers of fairness and balance, so we asked Culture Shift for one of their spokesmen to join the programme. We can only assume the invitation was lost in the post. But they did provide the following statement. We're delighted to be working with the Cabinet Office to ensure that they can take early intervention to proactively, split infinitive warning, to proactively improve and protect their culture and prevent incidences of bullying and harassment. Well, I hope they'll get somebody to improve their grammar before they teach too much to the civil service. But good luck with that. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up, the government is pursuing the Royal College of Nursing in the courts over a dispute about their strike mandate. And don't forget the Culture Wars debate. Marina Perkis will be here, and you won't want to miss her.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Neil says, you clearly seem to have a low opinion of our dysfunctional civil service. Is it beyond redemption? And what would it take to make it anywhere near functional? Well, we'll have to devote a whole programme to how to make it functional. John says, please explain who is in charge of the Cabinet Office money and why has he or she not had the sack for wasting my money? And that's the point. It's our money. It's taxpayers' money. And Kevin says, with all the Remainers in Cabinet, I'm not surprised at the left-leaning stupidity of the PMO. Now, the government is taking the Royal College of Nursing to court over what it has called unlawful strike action set to take place this Sunday for 48 hours. Well, the Royal College of Nursing's ballot closed on November the 2nd last year, providing a 6-month window in which it could strike. The government argues the 6-month period ends on the 1st of May, making a strike called for the 2nd of May unlawful. But the real question seems to me not whether it's lawful, not whether it meets the technical requirements of trade union law, but is it moral? Is it right for nurses and for doctors and for ambulance drivers to have been going on strike and risking the future of patients, the service of patients, the pain that patients have to suffer? And with me now is my exceptional panel, made up of the author and journalist, Ella Whelan, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Well, Peter, as you're representing Labour, or you're close to Labour, and therefore the party of strikes, do you think it is moral to be going on strike if you're a nurse?
I think it's unavoidable, and people go on strike because they feel like they've been left with no choice. I'm interested in the fact there's majority public support for these strikes. 52%, Jacob, you'll recognise that number from other votes. 52% public support. And the reason I say I do believe it's the right thing to do is because no one goes on strike gladly. When I was a newspaper reporter in the NUJ, I went on strike for several weeks, but I did that reluctantly. A bit different, of course, it's not a life-saving industry like the medical profession, but you do it because you care about your workplace. In this case, it's nurses or doctors caring about their patients.
But the police aren't allowed to go on strike, the army isn't allowed to go on strike. Is it fair that nurses and doctors who also have life-saving issues in their hands to go on strike?
Yes, and if you look back at, say, I'm 40, my lifetime, even Margaret Thatcher, who is at the absolute opposite end of the political spectrum, did not consider banning strikes in the NHS. So there's actually been a settled consensus across British society that striking is a democratic right. So there's no reason not to unwind that.
But Ella, consensus isn't always where you want to be, is it? Sometimes consensuses need to be challenged and the consensuses of the past need to change.
I actually think I think it's a moral issue, and I think that nurses are morally right to strike. I think there's been a really low attempt to emotionally blackmail workers who are pushed to the limit at the moment. And, I'm old enough to remember when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and he was talking very prominently.
It's not that long ago. I mean, my children can remember when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister.
I'm taking the mick. I'm saying it was only yesterday. And he talked about having a high-wage economy. This was a time when there was a shortage of lorry drivers. And in the short period from which he was in power to now, it feels like the government has completely flipped. And I know Rishi Sunak, says he's good at maths, but he's perhaps not so good as putting himself in the shoes of people who aren't earning eye-watering amounts of money. He's kind of completely poo-pooed the nurses' demands as utterly unaffordable. And actually, I think most people in the general public can understand that living on something like £34,000 when you have a family and a mortgage in London is impossible. I know lots of nurses who are quite excited about the prospect of striking, not because they don't care about their patients, because I think there is nothing more legitimate and,
excited
moral.
by the prospect of striking. That's quite a strong way of putting it. Excited by going on striking. It's excited of taking away that service from patients.
It's not about excited about taking the service away from patients. It's fighting for better living conditions and working conditions for yourself as an individual who is not to be degraded
But to go back to
longer.
what you quoted Boris saying about a high-wage economy, you don't create a high-wage economy in an inflationary era by inflation-busting pay rises, that actually makes it harder to get to a high-growth, high-wage economy. You just lead to more inflation.
I just don't think that argument is legitimate at the time when a government's asking people to take a real terms pay cut. It's also not the fault of your average, member of staff in a hospital ward. They are not to blame for the crisis we have in inflation or anything to do with the British economy. That's your party's fault because you're the one who are in power. And I think there's nurses, though they do a very different job with a different kind of skill level and a different consequences for when they retract their labour to a rail worker or to anyone different industries. They are still a worker. They still should have the same rights. You know that the strikes bill is being discussed in the Houses of Parliament at the moment. It was some of the most draconian legislation that I've ever set my eyes on, and I'm not that young. This is, I think at the moment the government is taking a very Steve Barclay's position just seems to me pretty cowardly. If you want to have the political row about strikes, the RCN wants to have it. The government says they want to have it.
Well, the RCN
if it just finished, at the moment the government is arguing, to me quite rightly, that, for example, you can't have courts and lawyers thwart political, the to and throes of political debate in relation to, the Rwanda policy. Why are you doing it in relation to the nurses?
Well, there are laws relating to strikes, and you can't have a strike ballot going on being valid forever, can you, Peter? It's got to have some time limit to it.
Well, I think that goes to perhaps one of the sad consequences, that who's going to benefit from this? Potentially the government, although I hope not, but also lawyers. And for lawyers watching, it's a classic argument of any time period. Does that begin on day 0 or day 1? In a sense, that's a technicality. Let's go back to the politics. Steve Barclay has already done a mini U-turn because he was initially trying to stop the whole strike. Now he's shrunk his ambitions to the final day of the strike. And I'd also make another broader point that is this a good outcome for anyone? You rightly spoke up for patients, as we all have, but this is not a good outcome for patients because there's either a strike or there's uncertainty if people have health problems. And Steve Barclay could have got together with ACAS, the Independent Neutral Conciliation Service, and he chose not to.
But where's the money coming from? We are at our highest tax level in 70 years. Who is going to pay for these increases in wages if they're granted to stop the strikes?
Well, where's the Labour coming from? Let me plead with you as someone who is obviously a free marketeer, and you're very well read, you understand Adam Smith. The government and the NHS are offering jobs in the NHS a certain level of pay, and we don't have enough skilled people taking up the jobs. And many people in the medical profession have gone to other nations like Australia. But Jacob, that tells us the free market is not setting the wages at the right level.
But any organisation that employs over 1 million people is going to have vacancies. It always will have, and you would expect it to have a vacancy level of over 7%, wouldn't you? That's just routine. Otherwise, people are staying there forever. You've always got vacancies in any large organisation.
Well, I would question that a bit. You'll always have vacancies, but in essentially a state-controlled National Health Service, shouldn't we be slightly better at trying to match demand and supply of labour?
Well, the issue there is the demand for treatment, isn't it? And with an ageing population, demand is going up and up. And that any organisation that has limited funds will not be able to provide unlimited care. That must be the case. And the health service has always suffered from that, right back to its foundation in the 1940s.
Well, I'll try to meet you halfway because I'm a reasonable person. Labour, which I'm not a spokesman for but a supporter of, has repeatedly said the NHS has to reform. Cast your mind back to Ed Miliband. I think he said in 2015, however much the Tories spend, we'll spend a few £billion more. Much as I liked him, that was not a credible argument. Wes Streeting is now arguing for reform.
Well, I was going to come on because I think what Wes Streeting is saying is really important because I think he's broken the logjam on politicians being willing to talk about serious reform of the NHS. Tories have been too nervous about it. Wes Streeting's opened the way, and that's very important because it does need reform.
It's very important. It's also the bare minimum. I mean, you know, what he said isn't particularly revolutionary. I think everybody and their mum knows that the NHS needs reform. It's just that politicians of all rosettes have been too cowardly to talk about it. But it's important to note that neither the Labour Party nor Conservatives are willing to meet anything near the nurses' demands. If you looked at the original sort of 19% pay rise, taking into account that would, in effect, mean something like just over 6% of the NHS budget. I mean, this is not sort of holidays in the Caribbean and kind of driving Mercedes.
6% of the NHS budget is nearly £10 billion. This is a huge amount of money.
Which I think is a bargain to pay properly the women and men who save our lives.
Even the RCN recognised that it could not go for the full 19% and back to wage. But we're going to have to move on. Thank you to my panel, but I'm glad to say they'll be back for some more controversy later, because coming up, we're going to be talking about Joseph Robinette Biden, because he has announced at the grand old age of 306 that he'll be running for a second term as President of the United States. Our quiz question: who is older, Joe Biden or Methuselah? And don't forget, the great culture war debate with Marina Purkis. Will there be fire and brimstone?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin,
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
People.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Jilly says lockdown, with its consequential catastrophic economic and social results, was all to do with saving the NHS. This is how nurses and junior doctors repay us. Disgusting. Steve says, Jacob, if they don't want to go to work, sack them and close the hospitals. We got by without the NHS before, and we can do it again. Well, it was quite some time ago before we got by without the NHS. I'm not sure I'm as hard-nosed as you are, Steve. David says the NHS staff have gold-plated pensions and generous sick pay, so give them the pay rise but reduced the pension and sick pay accordingly to pay for it. I think there may be something to do with pensions that could ease the difference between the government and the nurses. But now, moving on, President Joe Biden, who is a little bit younger than Methuselah, it has to be said, has announced his much-anticipated White House rerun in next year's election, making an explosive rematch against Donald Trump more likely. President Biden, along with his incumbent sidekick, Vice President Kamala Harris, will campaign under the promise to restore the soul of the United States. Mr. Biden, already the oldest American president in history, was quizzed about public concern about his age, responding, "Only thing I can say is watch me," in stark contrast to the wit of Ronald Reagan when challenged on the same subject back in 1984, who pledged not to exploit for political purposes his opponent's youth and inexperience. I must confess I'm reminded of Pitt the Elder's comment, who said the atrocious crime of being a young man he would neither attempt to palliate nor deny, but I don't suppose Biden could get away with that. What would a second Biden term mean for the United States, for Britain and for the world? Does Trump still stand a chance? Or are we braced for a challenge against another Ronald, the second touted budding Republican runner, Governor Ronald DeSantis? Well, with me now to discuss this is my brilliant panel, journalist and author Ella Whelan and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Ella, is he just too old?
Well, I mean, in general, I don't like picking on people because of their age, but there is... I don't think necessarily that it's because he's an old man, but it's because he feels...
Well, he's a very old man.
Yes, but it's not because of that. It's because he feels like old hat. There is nothing new about Joe Biden's politics. There is, it feels like a rerun of the previous election. Nothing substantial has changed. I was listening to the radio this morning, and one of his team, the best thing they could come up with was of his achievements in the last few years was the way in which he handled the pandemic, which actually I think a lot of American citizens would have something to row about because lots of them died and many of them don't think it was a success the way that panned out. So there's, it just feels like year zero. I don't understand why the Democrats and all the Republicans, Ron DeSantis sort of aside from this, can't come up with anything new and exciting to offer US voters. I probably think turnout's going to be very low. It feels like a very depressing time.
I think we can have a clip from the Biden promo, which I thought sounded like a very old man, so I don't know if we can hear that now.
Let's finish this job. I know we can, because this is the United States of America. There's nothing, simply nothing we cannot do if we do it together.
Peter, doesn't that just sound very old and not in the first flush of fighting youth to get things done?
Well, it's a slick video, and Biden's voice, I think, has gone from husky to full-on raspy. Of course, he's got the amazing pearly white teeth that American politicians don't have, and, we as tea and coffee drinkers look a bit different over here. The interesting thing, and Ella touched upon it, for me, is how Biden, aged 80, and a whole life Washington insider, has reinvented himself as a champion of the young left. I would call them progressives, you might call them woke, but he's reinvented himself as a champion of this group. That's what helped carry him through lifetime. I think one thing where I disagree with Ella is it's not at all going to be a rerun, even if Trump is a Republican candidate, because we're not in a COVID election. Clearly, COVID's still with us, but we're not in a pandemic election. And then secondly, the 34 charges against Trump. And there's basically going to be a drip of coverage. Who knows whether that's positive or negative in the long run. But I think it's going to be very different to last time.
But isn't it actually like the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, that you've got the two candidates who are most likely to lose to the other candidate, and it becomes a contest for the least unpopular rather than the most inspiring?
See, the way you described it makes me think that it does really sound like Groundhog Day, because Trump continues to define the political stage in America, and that's very depressing because I think he's got very little to offer voters. The kind of tagline, saving the soul of America, or let's get the job done. I think many people would lay the charge at Joe Biden that the job hasn't even started. The Democrats are still myopically obsessed with Donald Trump. They are not able to move away from it. And I think that just plays into Trump's hands, because it feeds the whole kind of notion that the American elite are against you. They don't care about the Rust Belters. They don't want to do anything substantial. All they want to do is play around with, gender pronouns and things like that. And that's really terrible for American politics. States and for American people, because there is a lot of problems. There's a lot of inequality. There's a big job to be done. Joe Biden's certainly not the man who's going to do it, and certainly not Kamala Harris. I mean, she really has become a joke. She's become a joke even within the Democrat Party. I just don't understand her rerunning.
Nobody takes her very seriously, do they? And with a president who would, if he survived the whole of the second term, be 86, she's a very, very important vice presidential candidate.
She's very important. You know, I wish good health on Biden and Trump and all my opponents. But I hope Biden wins and I hope he carries on. They're both a bit gaffe-prone. But as I was thinking about this on the way in, I don't think gaffes are particularly related to age. There's a certain group, perhaps in America, trying to pin cognitive decline on Biden, which is a bit unfair. But, of course, one of the biggest gaffes of the last 10 years have been British politics on a cause close to your heart, Brexit. You know, what does Brexit mean?
Lord.
Brexit means breakfast. So people make mistakes at any age.
All politicians make gaffes. I've got quite a good line in them myself, so I'm not going to go on the gaffe-prone nature of either of them. And George Bush Jr. was particularly gaffe-prone. But is this the best America can do? That it's such an amazing country, such a powerful country, creates some of the best business leaders the world ever sees, and yet it's got two presidential candidates, as far as one can tell, neither of whom seems to inspire great confidence.
I think America's biggest problem is that it's caught up in the culture wars. And that's not to say that some of these issues aren't important, because they are. But there is, yet again, we're having an election, we're faced with an election that's going to be defined between whether or not someone is going to jail, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, whether or not someone, there's a kind of a gotcha moment. And it feels incredibly infantile when, to sort of reiterate, there are lots of Americans who, a bit like us over here with the cost of living crisis, are facing some very serious dilemmas in their personal and political lives. And we have, it might be a slick campaign, but the substance of Joe Biden's pitch for president is kind of, I think, as you say, moving towards trying to get the attention of the progressive left, if that's what you want to call them. But those are not the kind of, that's not the kind of people that he should be talking to in that kind of myopic way. He should be looking at more substantial issues.
And Trump, the master of the understatement, has promised that there won't be a third world war if he's elected.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a very strange line to go down, joking aside, given all the stuff about North Korea last time. I really think that's a very poor line of attack for Trump. I think Trump lost it towards the end, and there are people like me on the left that accepted that, however unpleasant it was last time around, or the time before, Trump won, and he told some lies, but he did win, and we just have to accept the result. I think if Trump begins with the starting point of the last election was stolen, I think that's departing from reality. We can depart on policies, but depart from reality, I think, is a very different matter.
Well, I'm really pleased we can end on a point of agreement. I think politicians, Democratic politicians, should accept the result, even when they lose, perhaps particularly when they lose. Anyway, thank you very much to my panel. As I promised, they'd be brilliant, and they were. Up next, are the culture wars that we were touching on a figment of fevered right-wing imaginations, or are they socialist realities?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Graham says, on Biden, an octogenarian pope is the norm. Late HM Queen Elizabeth II was a nonagenarian. Both fair points. And Christopher says, hi, Jacob, love your segment. How come, though, you keep promoting Somerset as God's own county? What do you have against Essex? Well, I have nothing against Essex. My wife grew up in Essex. You win the county championship a bit too often for my liking, and we're waiting for Somerset still to do that. But Somerset is unquestionably God's own county. We must devote a whole programme to it and about its place in English history. Anyway, in the latest episode, what I'm told many are calling the culture wars, it was reported today that the Oxford University LGBTQ+ Society has called for the Oxford Union Debating Society to rescind its offer to former philosophy professor Kathleen Stock. The group released a statement expressing its dismay that a transphobic speaker would be invited as she disregards the welfare of LGBTQ+ students. The Oxford Union is a bastion of free speech. I was an officer when I attended the university, and I'm now a trustee of the parent charity, so I'm delighted that the Oxford Union is sticking to its guns because Ms Stock isn't a hateful person. She has merely expressed scepticism about gender ideology. But I'm now joined by the political commentator, Marina Purkis, who, as I understand it, Marina, you don't think the culture wars really exist? You think they're essentially a right-wing...
Oh, no, I think they exist because people like you and your party in government, they desperately need them to exist because what else are you going to win the next election on?
So they're not coming from people who want to pull roads down or want to edit Roald Dahl. Isn't there a battle of ideas that is going on that sometimes get expressed in extreme form?
So what I think's happened is it's a distraction technique. So don't get me wrong, I think any calls to rewrite Roald Dahl, for example, or to rename a street. By the way, the street renaming, if we go into that, it was called Black Boy Lane. You know, that was why they renamed the street. I think that's fair enough. If you had a street named, you know, White Trash, you might want to rename it. But I think what's happening here is you're drawing attention to these things that actually don't impact people's lives. And the reason you're doing that is because otherwise people might just focus on the real grievances in their life, which are basically caused by your government.
But doesn't no platforming actually affect people's lives? Because freedom of speech is absolutely essential for the political discussion that we're going to have.
Jacob, do you know what really impacts people's lives? And I really would just ask your viewers just to... You probably dislike me if you know who I am, but just ask your viewers to think about what really impacts their life. Is it Roald Dahl being rewritten, which, by the way, I don't think it should be? Is it the renaming of a street? Is it, I don't know, some woke policy? Is that really what's harming people? Or Is it the concern that they are going to be waiting for an ambulance and dying? Is it the concern that their children are getting a poor education? Is it the concern that we've got the highest energy bills on the planet?
But isn't this why you should stand up for freedom of speech? Because if you attack freedom of speech in some areas, you're then putting the government in control of the agenda. You're deciding politicians should.
Mr. Freedom of Speech here, did you or did you not vote to stop people protesting if it was annoying?
Well, there are limits on protest, but
so
public
free speech,
protest
so long as I'm OK with it.
No, public protest is a very important part of freedom of speech, and the laws that have been introduced are to get the balance right between people going about their daily lives. That's perfectly reasonable.
You tell me how freedom of speech is going to make people's lives better in this country after it's been decimated by things like your Brexit.
Because it's really important, because it allows you to come on this programme and make your case.
Sorry, me making my case on this programme, which I'll never come back on, is just so that people understand that this is not going to help them. Freedom of speech is not going to help you pay your bills. It's not going to put food on the table. It's not going to feed your kids.
But it allows you to make the argument that you're making.
Doesn't matter.
But that's so fundamentally
All
important.
I'm here to do is to draw attention to the fact that what you do
but that is freedom of speech. So it's really important to defend freedom of speech and protect it.
Your freedom of speech, all you do is you use your platform. And I can't believe you do this. Like, you were born into a life of privilege, Jacob, and you decided to be a con man, to lie to people who trust
I use my platform so that people like you have freedom of speech too, because I think it's really important.
I don't need you to defend my freedom of speech.
Make your
I
case.
need you to be in a position of
government. But the left don't like this, do they?
That's why
people are trying to stop
I didn't even realise I was on the left.
I
just realised it was a decent person, not some massive lefty. I just realised what you lot are doing in government is disgusting. And you lie and you lie, and you've got no contrition for what you've done to people. Your Brexit, do you care?
Well, people voted for Brexit. That's democracy.
Of course they did. I'm surprised I didn't vote for Brexit, given what you promised.
You think you know better than the British people?
I think you lied to people and they believed you.
I think the British people are more intelligent than that. The British people weighed up Brexit.
Are you telling me they should have known you were a liar?
I wasn't a liar.
So when you said to them...
All you're doing is mere abuse. You're not making any arguments.
Tell me how I'm wrong. OK, tell me I'm wrong. Let me ask you a question. When you said to people that Brexit was going to bring cheaper food...
It will.
Clothes, footwear and drink. So it will
all this is in progress. Joining the CTPPP, the free trade deal with Australia, the free trade deal with New Zealand, all of these are bringing in lower tariffs on food coming into this country. This is already in the pipeline.
What do you think is going to happen at the end of this year when those full Brexit checks are going to come into play? Do you remember the ones this time last year you said were an act of self-harm?
Yes, I stopped them. That's right.
They're coming in this year.
Well, there is no reason.
What's going to happen then?
There is no reason to bring those in. Those should be stopped again.
They're coming
in.
That's the Brexit.
The government can stop that. No, not at all. That is. If the government wishes to put those controls on, that is an act of a democratic government. Do I think they're foolish? Yes, of course I do. That's why I tried to stop them, succeeded in stopping them last year. I'm not in government, I'm a member of the Conservative Party. But why is it that food inflation is higher in the EU average than it is in the UK? We're doing better than the EU.
Why don't you compare us? Because I saw the other day you compared us to Austria for inflation. Great comparison there, Jacob.
It is a great comparison.
Oh, wonderful. Why on earth...
Our food inflation is lower than Germany.
Why would you compare us to Austria, who have the highest inflation, one of the highest inflations in the world, and also their GDP is in the billions, ours is in the trillions. Why then would you...
Our food inflation is lower than Germany. Why? So actually, I'm happy to take a variety of comparisons. Why Austria? Austria is renowned for its economic caution. There's a whole school of Austrian economists who are famous for economic caution.
Why don't you compare us to other comparable countries in the G7? Tell your viewers why our food costs are soaring and why they're going to continue to soar.
Our food costs are rising by less than the average for the EU and less than by Germany. So that's not too bad, is it?
No, it's going up. Why are our energy bills the highest on the planet?
Well, when I was in government, we made the biggest intervention to help people with their energy bills.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Why are they the highest on the planet?
The energy bills in the UK have gone up because of our green policies.
Oh, OK.
That has led to a very significant increase.
Nothing to do with Conservative failures year after year after year.
It's nothing to do with Brexit.
No, I'm not blaming Brexit for that, actually.
No, absolutely nothing to do with Brexit.
But
what was I trying to do? I was trying to reduce prices by fracking, by shale gas.
Fracking. Oh, here we
No,
go
that's right.
again. Here we go
Using
again.
our resources.
Fracking. Do you want to tell people how long it would take to get any sort of benefit from fracking and how teeny tiny that benefit would be, and the fact that it would do absolutely nothing?
Oh, we're potentially
to
sitting on
people's
trillions of
energy
cubic
bills.
feet of gas
You're lying,
underneath
and
us.
you're lying
I'm not.
again.
There are very good
You're lying.
geological studies showing this.
Do you
all
genuinely
you
believe?
say,
Do you believe your
all
lies?
you say when you disagree
Do you
is that
believe your
somebody is
lies?
lying. But this isn't a
You've
proper
been
political
proven.
argument.
You've been proven
No,
time and time
no,
again.
you
and you never say, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I told you that everything was going to be better and cheaper, and it's
you
not.
disagree with me, but that's not the same as somebody lying. Disagreement is perfectly reasonable.
Sorry, if you
but
promise something, and it doesn't materialise, that's a lie.
What I promised about tariffs on food is true. They are being reduced with the free trade agreements that we've been negotiating.
Should we revisit
and that's
that
really
at the
important.
end of this year when your act of self-harm comes into play?
Well, that would be madness if the government does that, and I shall oppose that very strongly.
OK, let's go.
So,
Why don't we?
why would the government?
Let's go back to woke, right? Because we want to talk about woke culture wars. I read your fascinating article with Frost in the Telegraph. That's a great person to partner with, by the way.
It is. He's a very great man, very distinguished figure. Responsible, wise, good.
Shoddy deal that now no one likes, by the way. No one's happy with this.
No, he did.
So well done. Great partner.
He got out of the European Union. He did a good negotiation with the EU.
Literally no one is happy with this. Brexiteers are not happy with this deal.
Well, I don't think that's right.
Okay.
I think the Brexiteers are very happy that we're out of the European Union.
In this article, you talked about how anti-woke policies are going to help recover the country. Whitney is recovering, right? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, how are your anti-woke policies going to help restore the economy, for example? Explain it.
Well, we want supply-side reform. We want the economy to get to higher levels of growth.
And
this
how
is
your
really,
anti-woke
this is
policies
really
gonna do
important.
that?
We don't want people distracted
Please explain
by
it.
all
We've
the
got
wokeness.
only a small amount of time.
Well, as we were discussing earlier, the £140,000, small amount of money in itself, being wasted by the Cabinet Office. That's part of the point.
140.
Yeah, but
Sorry,
that is simply,
we're talking about fixing the economy, and you've just quoted 140,000.
I'm talking about things that are symptomatic of the problems of the waste
Can I explain to your
within the
viewers,
government.
When Jacob talks about deregulation, that's a big thing. You're all about deregulation. What Jacob is talking about is scaling back your workers' rights and consumer rights.
I'm afraid we're going to have to draw this to a conclusion, but you're wrong on that because our employment rights all predate the European
This
Union
guy didn't even want minimum
by and
wage.
large.
In 2011,
but unfortunately, we've got to go straight to the weather. We've overrun. But the sun will no doubt be shining in Somerset, and it'll be a special, nice weather there. But over to the weather, and thank you so much to my guest for joining me this evening.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Another chilly night for many of us, but not for all. There'll be cloudier skies towards the southwest, and as a result, it will be a bit milder. We are going to see milder weather approach from the southwest, and it's eventually going to affect much of the UK by the weekend, with temperatures rising in many parts. But with that milder air, we'll also see more changeable conditions, areas of cloud, some outbreaks of rain, and some heavy showers developing. A fine day on Tuesday comes to an end with clear spells across central and northern parts of the UK. The lowest temperatures once again expected across Highlands, Scotland, -7 Celsius possible in one or two sheltered spots. A frost then for Scotland and northern England, eastern England, but elsewhere across the UK, a lot of cloud and as a result, frost-free towards the southwest as well as Northern Ireland. Here we've got cloudier conditions during Wednesday and some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle. But it's going to be increasingly gloomy towards the southwest with the cloud covering hills and some coastal mist and fog. Meanwhile, brighter skies for northern England, much of Scotland. We'll see some showers developing across southern Scotland and northern England, but in between some sunny spells. And further wintry showers expected for the Northern Isles, but really it's sleet around coasts and snow confined to the hills. Into Wednesday night then, the cold air persists in the north of Scotland with another frost likely. Elsewhere across the UK, too much cloud to allow a frost to form. And in fact, we'll see some outbreaks of rain reaching western Scotland, southern Scotland by the end of the night. And as we start off Thursday, some wetter weather waiting in the wings towards the southwest. 10 Celsius in the Scilly Isles, a mild start to the day here, but a wet start. And that rain moves into the southwest of England during the morning, reaching South Wales later in the morning, and then becoming much more